With standard rotation happening in early 2023, I decided to go back and try to win a battle with every single Pokemon VMAX ever created. If you're at all familiar with VMAXs, you know there's some truly terrible ones out there. Going into this, I thought I might spend days trying to win with someone like Eevee Vmax, but then I realized I'm using Pokemon TCG Live. Because no one was actively playing it when I began the challenge, the odds of being matched up against a brand new player was quite high. So, for once, being one of the few dozen TCG Live players paid off. Before I do a recap of the first year of Sword and Shield, I need to explain some of the rules for this VMAX challenge, many of which I made up as I went along. First off, Arceus V-Star was banned. Obviously using Arceus would make my life so much easier, so I decided that it could never be used. I also had to use a 4-3 line of the VMAX in each deck. Finally, the VMAX in question had to be responsible for the majority of knockouts. I couldn't just use a Miltank or something to take all my prizes. The VMAX had to be the star of the show. Oh, and if you're wondering why TCG Live looked so different, this was how it looked for the first 7+ months of its life, and like most babies that age, it was ugly. And like most babies who reach 8 months, it moves a lot faster now but still needs to wear diapers for all of the leaking it does. With all of those boring rules out of the way, let's get started with the first VMAX ever printed, Meowth. Meowth is just so bad. It requires 4 energy to attack and then only does 200 damage. When I look back at every colorless VMAX, they're all essentially just worse versions of Arceus V-Star, except they give up 3 prizes instead of 2. My journey with Meowth started off predictably with me getting destroyed in the first couple of games. Then I faced off against someone in my chat who dead drew for 3 turns, and I still lost because Meowth is horrible. In Game 4, I squared off against someone using the Zacian and Zamazenta starter deck. For those who don't know, TCG Live gives you several free semi-competitive decks when you finish the tutorial. While Zamazenta V is a challenge because it's immune to VMAX attacks, the starter deck plays 0 stadiums, so once I dropped my path to the peak, my odds of winning went way up. Unfortunately, my opponent disappeared about halfway through the game, though I was on track to win. While I didn't want it to count, my chat convinced me otherwise, and I eventually decided that it counts, mostly because my opponent did show up after a while. So after 4 games, I was the Meowth champion. If you thought Meowth Vmax was bad, take a look at Eevee Vmax. Just 300 hit points and an attack that only does 150 damage. It's so much worse than Arceus V-Star, it's not even funny. That laughing I did prior to recording this audio was because I put peanut butter on my toes and let my dog lick it off. As for Eevee's attack, which sees you cuddling your opponent into submission, it forces your opponent's Pokemon to flip a coin when they attack. If it's tails, it fails. Problem is, switching breaks this, as does evolving. In Game 1, I thought I had a really good chance to win. Blissey's a great matchup, and it seemed like I was poised to eventually deck them out. Well, my opponent got their timer down to under 5 minutes, mostly because they thought it'd be fun to spam emotes non-stop. And on TCG Live, you can't mute your opponent because why would you want to mute them in-game when you can put a post-it note on your monitor instead? Anyways, the 35-minute game came down to the wire, but a clutch boss's orders by my opponent cost me the game. I was crushed. All that time wasted for nothing. In Game 3, I went up against what I thought was the Shadow Rider starter deck, except they dropped a Bugcatcher and a Berry on me. Thankfully, Shadow Rider needed to 2-shot my Pokemon just like Eevee needs to 2-shot them, so between a couple of successful cuddles and a busted boss's orders top deck on the final turn, I won. Which means, despite what my ex-wife would tell you, I'm a great cuddler. While Venusaur and Blastoise Vmax are technically Year 2 Vmaxes, I decided to go through every promo exclusive Vmax first. If you didn't know Venusaur Vmax existed, it's probably because it's not very good. You need 10 grass energy in play to deal 300 damage, which isn't even enough to one-shot most Vmax Pokemon, unless your name is Eevee. Anyways, in Game 2, I had a great chance to win. All I needed to do was Professor's research into 2 of the remaining 5 energy in my deck. Well, I got 1. Then it was a case of hoping for a boss's top deck on my next turn. I had a 1 in 9 chance, but they were playing Shadow Rider and drew their whole deck on their final turn and won, removing any hope I had. In Game 3, I called my shot and got Samurott V-Star. I proceeded to destroy them, dealing 330 damage to a Sobble before winning the following turn. Samurott definitely doesn't want to see a Grass Vmax deck that can one-shot it through weakness, so after just 3 games, we got there with Venusaur. This doesn't mean it doesn't still suck though. With Blastoise Vmax, it didn't take long. It's much better than Venusaur, though still worse than Palkia V-Star, mostly because Blastoise needs more energy. Regardless, I was feeling good going into it, and I felt even better when I saw who I was matched up against. My first opponent had a 0 ranking and played the Starterization deck. Yeah, like I said, ranked in live means nothing when there's only like 10 people playing. Anyways, they whiffed Intrepid Sword early on with Zacian V, and I got a turn 2 Grand Falls, all but sealing it early. To deal with Zamazenta, Blastoise V came in clutch. So far, Blastoise gave me my fastest victory. And if you think facing starter decks shouldn't count, know that the losses I'm not showing are against tier 1 decks like Mew and Palkia. I go through the pain of facing to a deck so I can face these starter decks. I lose so I can win. Lapras is the first VMAX from Sword and Shield base set. It was a fun deck back in the day with Frostmoth, able to deal over 300 damage on turn 2 with some luck, but has since fallen on hard times. Still, I knew that a good start was all I needed to swing for a huge number on my second turn. Well, I decided to run a version with Kingler V that wasn't great, though I did end up winning on game 2. Don't ask me why I thought Kingler would be better. Yes, it can accelerate 5 energy from your deck with a coin flip, but it's only 5 at a time. Despite that early victory, I did want to win with the Frostmoth version, so I queued up and faced Gyarados Mill. They had Yellhorn but sucked on coin flips, and I won thanks to my expert ability to manipulate coin flips. In a format with Manaphy, Morpeko Vmax isn't good. Well, Morpeko Vmax isn't good to begin with, only dealing 180 damage for 3 energy and being tied for the lowest Vmax HP at 300. But if I could only run into Palkia, it'd seem unstoppable. Of course, that didn't happen. My first 3 games were rough and included a match where I was absolutely sauced by a Reggie deck. I'm not going to show that because I want to display an air of invincibility. So I'm only showing you game 4, which was against Palkia and saw me winning without much of a challenge. See, if you only watch this video, I seem like an unstoppable juggernaut. I attempted this first part of the VMAX challenge over the summer, so Lost Origin wasn't out yet. At the time, Stonejourner had had a renaissance with healing and surviving 100 damage, and the renaissance Stonejourner had had a positive impact, allowing an idiot such as myself to win. Even with multiple misplays on my part, something I rarely do, I played well when it counted and beat Palkia via deck out in game 1. Since Palkia needs your opponent to have bench Pokemon, if you just have a single Stonejourner in play with a bunch of stone energy attached, they're boned. Or I guess, stoned. When Arceus V-Star released with Brilliant Stars in February, it outclassed many of the VMAX Pokemon that already existed, none more so than Snorlax Vmax. Snorlax does base 60 damage for 3 energy and maxes out at 210 with a full bench. Arceus does 200 damage for 3 energy and accelerates 3 energy into play and only gives up 2 prizes. So I had low expectations going in. Luckily, I faced a viewer who was using an old Zeraora deck to give me a chance, and I won in just my second game. As I said many times on stream during this challenge, we take those. Because grass types always show up first in a set, Rillaboom was my starter for Rebel Clash. While certain VMAXs have simply been outclassed due to time, Rillaboom Vmax was never good and it continues to not be good. 130 base damage for 4 energy is garbage, though you can discard 3 energy to build it up to 280. The problem Rillaboom suffers is consistency. You pretty much have to get the stage 2 baby Rillaboom up and running to keep the energy flowing. Not even Gardenia can improve things because Gardenia only attaches to the bench, it only draws 2 cards, and it's just nowhere near as good as Welder. The Pokemon Company clearly knew I'd be doing a VMAX challenge in 2022 though, so they used Future Sight and made Dark types weak to grass in the Sword and Shield era. That meant Samurott V-Star didn't stand a chance and I won in game 3. If you're wondering why Samurott V-Star has popped up a few times in this challenge, that's because it was given away for free as part of the Battle Pass. Continuing my trek through the Galar Starter VMAX, Inteleon Vmax only took a single game to win with. Because the player count for TCG Live was so low at the time, I lucked out by facing a new player running the free Zacian Zamazenta deck. Yes, Zamazenta can mess me up, but that deck doesn't play any stadiums. So once I got my copy of Path to the Peak into play, it was all elementary like Abbott. Though an early Marnie did decimate me and turn what should have been an easy game into a stressful nightmare. This Cinderace Vmax deck is one of my crazier ideas. Cinderace's first attack is Counter. It does 30 damage plus the amount of damage it received in the previous turn. You can boost its hit points with Big Charm and Heat Energy, and you can heal off that damage with Slowking by getting lucky on coin flips. Even though Slowking decided to troll me quite regularly by dealing instead of healing, my first battle was against Lunatone Solrock, a very winnable matchup thanks to that Slowking, and I did win. Yes, it's okay to call me a deck building genius, I won't let it go to my feet. Continuing the theme of me being the best deck builder ever, I also won my first game with Toxtricity Vmax. Sure, you could argue that I had a type advantage going up against Arceus Togekiss, but you could also argue that I'm the greatest deck builder in the Pokemon TCG universe. Toxtricity was playable back in the day, dealing 240 damage if your opponent's active is poisoned, but it has a lot of moving parts, so it requires a deft touch. Someone with nice fingers who never misplays. I was that someone and kissed Togekiss goodbye. I'll freely admit to hating Dragonapult Vmax. When Dragonapult was at its height, I'd face it constantly and the games would always play out the same. They'd win the coin flip, go first, get a Dragonapult V in the active, attach an energy, and pass. At that time, it was inevitable I'd lose because all my weaker Pokemon would get picked off on the bench while my active took a direct hit of 130 damage. Okay, maybe hate isn't the right word. Loathe. Loathe sounds better. Anyways, I lost the first game while rooting for my opponent to find a boss's orders because I want to see Dragonapult cry. Unfortunately, I'm just too good at Pokemon cards and beat Palkia Ice Rider in my second game, thanks to an early path to the peak while also destroying any Bidoof that dared step foot onto their bench. Even when I'm trying to lose, I still win. Leon would be jealous. Malamar has a lot of potential as a VMAX, but really only when it's paired with Arceus V-Star. So I got absolutely obliterated by a Groudon deck in Game 2, a shameful moment I have yet to live down. Then I got destroyed by a Torterra deck in Game 3. In Game 4, I ran into a mashup starter deck featuring Inteleon and Ice Rider. Thanks to Malamar's Max Jammer, I was able to remove their hand and ultimately won the game because they couldn't, play the game. I imagine the battle was super fun for them. If you attach 4 energy to a Copperajah VMAX as well as a Choice Belt, you still can't one-shot an Arceus V-Star. Without Lucario and Melmetal GX and Brock's Frying Pan, Copperajah really doesn't have much to work with. Its first attack, Dangerous Nose, isn't very dangerous. It requires 3 energy and only does 200 damage only if your opponent's active is a basic, otherwise it's 100. That probably explains why it took me a whopping 5 games to win with the Metal Elephant, finally defeating Urshifu. My game plan with most Metal VMAXs was to play Bronzong and Cheryl, but clearly even being able to heal off all damage isn't enough to make Copperajah playable. Just like Ash, you probably forgot Butterfree even existed, didn't you? Butterfree VMAX has never been good and it's not difficult to see why. It does 150 damage for 3 energy with the only saving grace being that it causes confusion upon attacking. But 300 hit points and a fire weakness isn't great, which is why I wanted to concede early in Game 3 against the Charizard deck. There was no way I was going to do well, right? In actuality, thanks to getting lucky on confusion flips, I managed to win a game I had no business doing well in. It's really insane how many VMAX Pokemon Arceus V-Star made playable. That's precisely why Arceus was banned from the challenge. I wanted to suffer. And I figured Charizard VMAX would cause me the most pain. Its best attack requires 5 energy and discards 2 in the process. Yes, it deals 300 damage, but in a format without Welder, how would that even be possible? Well, the TCG Live matchmaking gods decided to smile upon me, and my first game was against Stonejourner. Stonejourner has 330 hit points, the perfect number for Charizard with a Choice Belt attached. It wasn't the easiest victory of the VMAX challenge because of all those shenanigans Stonejourner can get up to, but I won nonetheless. And what do I always tell my kids before sending them off to school? Winning is all that matters, and if you come home with second place, you're sleeping out in the yard. I purposely decided to do the VMAX challenge towards the tail end of the Sword and Shield era because it would allow the zaniest combos somebody in 2020 couldn't predict. Thanks to the new Pokemon Go Charizard, I could double the amount of fire energy attached to Centiskorch, dealing twice as much damage as normal. In my first game, I squared up against a water Urshifu. Definitely wasn't expecting that. Seriously, who plays the water Urshifu? It was like Pokemon TCG Live dangled nice matchmaking in front of my face like a plump, juicy sausage, then batted it to the floor when I queued up with Centiskorch. But even with my opponent having the weakness advantage, they were still short of a KO and promptly conceded because they knew I was amazing at Pokemon cards and continuing to battle would be futile. Across the VMAX challenge, there have been some truly heartbreaking games. No VMAX exemplifies this more than Grimmsnarl. In my second game, I needed a boss's orders on the final turn to win. Despite me thinning down to the final 3 cards in my deck, Giovanni decided to not show up for work. After that, I ended up facing a couple of Palkia decks. Grimmsnarl requires 5 energy to deal 270 damage, whereas Palkia needs 2, so this is a nightmare matchup and I never won. In Game 5, I was in jeopardy of making it to my first ever 6th battle and declaring Grimmsnarl the worst VMAX ever made, but I faced a toolbox deck with a lot of moving parts and managed to win. It seemed like the TCG gods, let's call them Arceus because the game is butt, didn't want me to ever reach Game 6. I will always be a staunch defender of Eternatus Vmax. Sure, things like Path to the Peak, Avery, and Miltank are devastating, but it still has the potential to deal 270 damage for 2 energy, all while having 340 hit points. That can never be overlooked. Well, because Eternatus is great, I absolutely demolished every opponent I faced. I won in Game 1 against Palkia, then I played a second game for fun and beat another Palkia. And because I'm the greatest Eternatus player ever, I even managed to beat a Stage 2 Decidueye deck in Game 3. Bow down before me, the darkest day has arrived for all those who oppose me. The VMAX challenge was taking a very long time, so I decided to take a break and hack off. Oh wait, I pushed through and played Scizor Vmax, silly me. My first game with Scizor was against Mew Vmax. It came down to the absolute wire, but between scissoring my opponent really hard and hacking them off to remove their choice belt and double turbo energy, I ended up decking them out because I'm a master at baiting people into making mistakes. By all accounts, Scizor is a terrible VMAX, but when I rub my fingers on the card, good things happen. With the release of Manaphy, Salamence Vmax became even more relevant in the standard format. Sniping 40 to 2 Pokemon was never all that great, even if it is for 1 energy. And 240 damage for 4 energy isn't good either, especially when you can't use the attack in back-to-back turns. I was expecting a long trek to victory, but thankfully I faced an Arceus Medicham Blastoise deck. Why is that good, especially when they play Manaphy? Because it was against a viewer and they told me they prized 3 Arceus. Some may call it luck. I say I put the fear of God into a literal god and won in just my second game. Drednaw Vmax didn't go according to plan at all. I thought a healing version would work. It has 320 hit points and reduces damage by 30, so it seemed like a decent candidate. It wasn't. Unlike me, you can never trust Cheryl, or Roxanne for that matter. Gmax Headbutt is also a wildly inconsistent attack, relying on a coin flip to do 240 damage. So after the healing version failed, I switched to an attacking version and ultimately beat a Machamp deck in Game 4. Sure, the Machamp deck didn't have much of anything going on the entire game, but we take those. Gardevoir sucks and is one of the blandest VMAX Pokemon ever made. But if you can do enough healing, it's still terrible. 180 damage is painfully low, so you're two-shotting everything meaningful. The only positive about Gardevoir is that unlike most other Psychic Pokemon, it has a metal weakness, not a darkness weakness. That was absolutely key. I played a dominant game against Samurott V-Star and shredded their strategy through healing. It only took 2 games for me to win with a terrible VMAX, further proving my brilliance. Seriously though, why is Gardevoir so bad? Did the Pokemon Company think we'd be distracted by how attractive Gardevoir is and not notice we're getting destroyed in the process? Well, joke's on them, they were only half right. I had zero concerns about Alcremie Vmax going into this. With the release of Lunatone and Solrock, which flood the field with Psychic Energy from your discard pile, and Alcremie dealing 60 damage for each Psychic Energy you discard, it could easily KO any Pokemon in the format. All I did was chuck an Energy Switch or 2 in there, I squared up against Ice Rider Calyrex in Game 2, and I sent the horse to the glue factory with a 420 damage final attack. See, even when I barely put any thought into a deck, I can win. Usually I have to pull a Lucy and use 69% of my brain power to build decks. Here I just looked at Alcremie, looked at Energy Switch, and just sort of mashed them together like a kid experimenting with Barbie and Ken dolls. At the time I played Orbeetle Vmax, the alien ladybug had undergone its sudden and surprising emergence. With all of the switching cards in Standard, Orbeetle's able to take advantage of its Eerie Beam ability multiple times per turn, putting 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. In a format with a lot of Sobble, Orbeetle was really strong. And in Game 2, I faced Samurott V-Star, which is weak to grass. So even though Orbeetle's attack can be fairly weak, between KOing Sobble and one-shotting Samurott, it was an easy victory. While Manaphy is always a problem for spread cards, do you know what deck doesn't protect their bench? Mew Vmax. And either my opponent wasn't playing Oricorio or it was prized, making my life that much easier. Seriously, I wouldn't have stood a chance if they had Oricorio. While a spread of 30 to every bench Pokemon is small, especially when you need 4 energy, attaching a telescopic sight bumps that up to 60, and Mew Vmax loves having a full bench. I'll admit I had no business winning this game. They were down to 1 prize and all I'd knocked out was a Meloetta at that point, but they whiffed a boss's orders on a crucial turn and I went on to win with Darmanitan in just my second game. Did you know there's 4 different Pikachu V in Standard? I knew there was more than 1, but 4 definitely seems like a bit much, even for the franchise's mascot. Anyways, Palkia is a good deck that lots of people play. Palkia is weak to lightning, Pikachu is a lightning type. In my second game with Pikachu, I faced Palkia and it wasn't going great. But I had chat screaming at me that the terrible Pikachu V can actually KO a Palkia if I attach a Choice Belt. Who's the best deck now, Palkia? Colossal Vmax has seen a lot of success in Expanded. In Standard, not so much. However, if you're able to get a few Stone Energy attached as well as a full face guard, suddenly you're reducing any damage your opponent can deal by 80. That was the plan in my second game against Arceus Aggron. Obviously, Arceus being weak to fighting made my life easier, but I did manage to KO an Aggron V with Gmax Boulder, all while surviving a Revenge Trinity Nova from an Arceus V-Star sealing up the win. You could almost say Colossal made me rock hard. Because of its Sonic Edge attack, which can spank Miltank's miraculous body, Aegislash-V has always been a card that existed. But Aegislash-Vmax isn't very good at the beginning of the game. It does base 160 damage for 3 energy, that's meh. For each prize card you take though, that damage goes up by 30, still meh. You basically need to take 3 prize cards before Aegislash is truly good. So like most every other Metal VMAX deck, I relied on the Bronzong Cheryl healing strategy. And because I'm the greatest Aegislash VMAX player ever, I won in my first game against Tapu Koko VMAX. I needed to draw into a switch to escape paralysis right at the end, and guess what? I got the switch. Good players always draw the cards they need, just don't check their lap. If you know me, you know I hate control decks. They require a lot of thinking, which I struggle with. So it was no surprise that Togekiss VMAX took me to game 5. It only does 120 damage, 100 with a double turbo energy attached, but you can go get any 2 cards from your deck. In that 5th game, I faced Rapid Strike Urshifu with Zeraora V. The Urshifu is easy to deal with since Togekiss resists fighting. The Zeraora is a massive problem though because it hits for weakness and snipes the bench. So I modified my strategy. Instead of trying to attack, I just bumped all of their Rapid Strike energy and Spiral energy. When all of that was in the discard pile, they could no longer attack and I won. Yep, best Togekiss player ever here. Even though Shining Fates was released in a different calendar year than all the previous sets, every VMAX here is still part of the D block, meaning they'll rotate at the beginning of 2023. Game 1 saw the second place Worlds deck discard every research on turn 1. My luck extended throughout the match and I got everything I needed when I needed it, culminating in a victory for me. I played a few more games with Dhelmise and came to this conclusion. If everything goes right for you and everything goes wrong for them, it's actually kinda busted. But if you struggle to get your stage 2 Rillaboom into play, Dhelmise is cracked like a butt. Some people are just born lucky. Considering that I migrated to Pokemon TCG Live on day 1 and couldn't go back to PTCGO, I am not one of those people. However, in my first game with Crobat VMAX, I faced Lunatone Solrock, a deck that can't do anything against Weezing. Once the Weezing was set up, I just used Stealth Poison on Crobat to switch into it every turn, meaning they couldn't accelerate energy into play with Solrock. And even with my horrible draws, I still won without breaking a foot sweat. Something that did make my feet sweat was Ditto VMAX. I fully expected to be stuck in Ditto Purgatory for days trying to find the perfect matchup. Ditto's only attack is Max Transform, which copies one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks. Problem is, a lot of attacks these days are deck specific. For instance, Ditto is useless against Mew VMAX with Meloetta because you don't play Fusion Energy. But in Game 2, I felt like I had a chance. It was a battle against Radiant VMAX with Banette. The game was super grindy and just rough all around. On the final turn, they needed energy to win, whiffed, and I ultimately won. So while Ditto VMAX is terrible, you can always trust your pilot to win. As terrible as my luck with coin flips is, at least decks that use them are exciting. Well, in my first game with Cramorant, things were more heartbreaking than exciting. It was almost painful. Coin flips were not going my way, yet I still found myself taking KOs. But it got so bad that I had to attack their Miltank with my Blastoise. And yes, with nearly every deck in this challenge, Miltank was a massive problem. But remember when I said I'm the greatest Pokemon TCG player in history and you all nodded in agreement? I made a 3000 IQ play by scooping up the Diancie to remove it from play at the very end of the game, lessening the amount of damage their Miltank could do to my damaged Blastoise. That sealed the victory. And because Cramorant still took several knockouts, the win counted, meaning the first year of Sword and Shield VMAXs was done. For a quick recap of year 1, I played 35 different VMAX Pokemon. Copperajah, Grimmsnarl, and Togekiss all took me to Game 5, but no one reached Game 6. You can also see a fancy graph right here showing how many games it took to win. As I'm recording this video, I'm making my way through the second year of Sword and Shield VMAXs live on Twitch. Did you know that there are 15 VMAX in Evolving Skies? Kinda crazy. But if you want to see my brilliance happen in real time, follow me over there. Otherwise, as long as this video gets more than 420 views, I'll do another recap in the future.